Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Corporate Governance and Audit Committee on the 22nd of April. It's nice to see you all again. I hope you're well. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Just a reminder, colleagues, if you'd like to chat to make a contribution, please indicate in the chat box and I'll bring you in. First item on the agenda is the membership of the committee. I've had apologies from Councillor Turner, who's ex officio to this committee directly. Yolanda, have we had any further apologies?
Not so far, no. None.
All right, thank you very much. Minutes for the previous meeting, I trust that they're okay, colleagues. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any interest that they'd like to declare? No, thank you. This meeting is being taken in public. The final item on the agenda, a section of the quarterly report of internal audit, will be taken in private. That's item number 17. We don't believe we have any deputations or petitions, do we, Yolanda?
None received.
Thank you very much. So that brings us on to the proposed revisions to the contract procedure rules reference to annual council. So I'll hand over to the officer to speak on that, please. Thank you very much.
Morning, everybody. My name's Jane Lockwood. I'm the head of procurement. So I'm just going to take you through the proposed changes. First of all, many apologies for the tracked version. I appreciate it will have been really, really difficult for you all to read. So some of that is because we've done some general housekeeping with the documentation. So we needed to do a fair bit of reformatting just to make it easier to navigate around the document when we do get to the clean and approved version. We've also moved the definitions to the back of the document. This is a deliberate intention, really, because there's quite a lot of technical definitions which we think sometimes are quite off-putting for officers. So we've tried to make it simpler. It might not feel like that on track changes, but the intention is that the document reads a little bit smoother. So I'm going to take you through the main changes. The intention wasn't really to take you through the simplified text, but I'm more than happy to go back to any areas if members find that useful. Okay, so in terms of the main changes to the documentation, since this last came for discussion and approval, we have left the EU, so that is the biggest significant change. So whilst we've left the EU, in terms of what that means for procurement practice in reality is very little change at this moment in time. So the procurement directives transferred into UK law in the form of public contract regulations, and the thresholds remain the same as they have done previously. The biggest change really is the e-notifications system that we use for when we're publishing notices about new procurements. So previously that was referenced as OJU throughout the documentation. That's Official Journal of the European Union. That's now a new system called Find a Tender. So same principles apply in how we post notices, just a different system that we use. So throughout the documentation, we've replaced the EU references and the references to OJU. Okay, so other changes include the introduction. So we've made some deletions in there just really to improve the clarity of the purpose of the documentation. So just being really clear that these are minimum standards. These are the standards that we use to procure goods, works and services. We've added an additional text around grants. So the reason for this really is I think throughout the pandemic, the use of grants has probably come into play more. So, and I think that's prompted a number of conversations from officers about when is it best to use a grant, when is it best to undertake a procurement. So colleagues in finance and audit, I know, have covered grants in the financial procedure rules as well. So this is just to mirror some of those questions, and I'll come more to grants when we get to the appendices as well. Okay, we've refreshed the procurement principles, and that's just again just to highlight and reinforce that actually we should be encouraging the use of local bidders. Value for money is still obviously the prevailing principle, but we should be connecting, engaging and encouraging as much local participation as possible. Okay, I'm going to then take you down to the summary note, so 1.4.3. So we've added an additional responsibility here around making sure that there's a nomination of a contract manager. So this addition is really just about a more focus on contracts. So whilst we will procure in the best way possible, we need to be sure and certain that somebody's accountable and responsible for overseeing the performance of that contract. So that might be something that we want to expand on in future revisions, but I think we just wanted to bring that principle into the contract procedure rules. Okay, 1.5. So I just want to be clear here, we're not suggesting a change in decision making or anything. Again, I think this is just reinforcing, highlighting the need that we need to have record of our decision making. Previous contract procedure rules might have focused on, do we have the budget? What we're reinforcing here is, do we have the authority and do we have a record of that decision making process, so that when we come to award a contract, it's very straightforward. Taking you down to 2.1.15, we've made a change here around when bonds will be required. So previously we asked for bonds to be considered in all contracts over 300,000. I think what this resulted in was lots of inquiries and probably not really an efficient use of time in consideration of bonds. So we focused it into 3 areas now. Capital construction works in excess of 300,000, any IT contracts that involve pre-operational payments in excess of 300,000, and then any significant contracts with a total consideration of 300 million or more. Obviously, payment terms come into account in others, and standard practice is payment in arrears. Taking you down to 4.14 to 4.16. We've made some changes to the wording, really to simplify the conditions for use of presentation and interviews as part of a procurement process. So the change here is really to introduce a little bit of flexibility. Previously, we were stating that all bidders had to be invited if presentation and interviews were used as part of a process. So we've removed this, and what this means is we'll be really transparent when we go out to tender, stating what the process will be and how many bidders we will take through. The reason for this change is we don't want to waste people's time either. So if we've got a contract and there is 10 bidders and only 4 have a chance of winning based on their scores, then we would only want to take the 4 through that would have a chance. So this just allows a little bit more flexibility. Presentation and interviews aren't the norm, they're only used when appropriate. Taking you down to 5.14.7. So previously we had a cap of a 5-year limit on something that we call a dynamic purchasing system. So what this is essentially an open market electronic solution. So by that I mean it's a framework that allows suppliers to join throughout the life of this particular arrangement. They're all pre-qualified, and then we run competitions. So it's open, anybody can join, very transparent. So we have removed the 5-year cap on this, so that allows us to run these for longer. They take a lot of time to set up, and they're quite intensive. So that was one of the reasons for that change. To make sure that there's some diligence, we've added the additional statement around undertaking diligence assessments of the suppliers. Okay, taking you down to 5.18 and 6.2. So we've added some additional text here around direct awards and ensuring that value for money is a consideration and is evidenced as part of that process. So I think this is just to reflect that framework providers in the marketplace are offering lots of different compliant routes to market, which involve direct awards or mini competitions. In some cases, direct awards will be the right route to market, but this is just a reinforcement of, we need to demonstrate this, and we need a decision. We need to demonstrate it, and we need to be able to benchmark these kind of awards and have clear records around them. Taking you down to 11.1, so a new addition there just to cover modifications during contract terms. So this is just a reminder for council staff just to come and talk to colleagues in legal and procurement if they're considering variations, modifications or terminations, so we can help them resolve those. And then finally, just taking you down to the appendices. So we've removed one appendices, which was just a link to sort of FPRs and GDPR type information. It didn't feel that these were adding much value, so we removed those. That those policies exist in their own right. Appendix 1 has been updated to include the most relevant threshold. Appendix 2 has been updated just to include information that we require for transparency reasons for contracts register. And then we have the new Appendix 4. So this is a guide, and I do want to stress it's a guide. It's probably a work in process guide, and it's more to stimulate some further thought about the nature of our relationship, the purpose of the grant or contract, and it's to help support commissioners across the council just to think about what that looks like, and really just to signpost them back to us so we can have a conversation and support staff. So I think I've covered the main changes that I wanted to bring your attention to. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jane, for that comprehensive walk through it. You apologised for the track changes, but I actually find it quite helpful in terms of being able to know, direct ourselves as to where we know the changes have taken place and taken a look at them. So thank you very much. And it's also good to see that we're still emphasising that we use local as much as possible, as well as value for money in our procurement. So it's good to see that that's still in there. Members, do you have any comments or questions for Jane with regard to the report? I can see Councillor Smage has put her hand up, so I'll bring Councillor Smage in first.
Thank you. I just got a couple of clarifying questions, please. Page 43, at the bottom of that page, 6.6, it's talking about the use of another local authority as supplier of services. Can I just clarify, we're not anticipating then that the new combined authority would in any way procure on behalf of the local authorities within the combined authorities, or is that covered under those words local authority, please? And at page 39, you're talking about your standing lists, and I just wondered, do you have a review of the standing lists on a particular regular basis to ensure that all suppliers on the standing list are still okay? And at page 21, on the officer decisions, it says at 1.5.3, all significant officer decisions taken relating to the procurement exercise, i.e. decisions which may be of interest to councillors and or the public, are recorded. That sounds a little up for interpretation, if you follow my drift, and so I'm wondering, is there a more formal process in that, or is it just for the officers to make a subjective decision? I'm just wondering how that is arrived at. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Jane, do you want to come back in on those points, please?
Yeah, thank you. And I've shut my I've shut my document down, so I'm struggling with the page numbers. So I might need to ask Councillor Smage to repeat some of those questions, but I haven't actually got the document back up yet. So please bear with me. So review of standing lists. So I think that do we review standing lists? So is there a mechanism for reviewing? So we review. I think that's an area perhaps where we probably do need to ensure that the reviews take place, or whether, I think that's an area for further strengthening, so that there is ongoing due diligence of suppliers and those kind of activities on an annual basis. And in fairness, we don't have many standing lists. I think we only have a couple left now. So we've moved more to these dynamic purchasing systems where we use them for commonly purchased goods or works. So the answer to the question is yes, they are reviewed. They're not reviewed by procurement colleagues, they're reviewed by contract managers within services. So I think there is an area perhaps for further diligence around that, making sure that the assurances and checks and balances are okay. So the question was about 1.5.3, wasn't it? About significant decisions and recording of. Councillor Smage, could you remind me what the question was? Sorry.
Yeah, the wording is significant officer decisions to be recorded, absolutely, i.e. decisions which may be of interest to councillors and or the public are recorded. And that sounded a bit subjective. So was there any particular criteria? That's what I'm asking, rather than a subjective decision.
No. I think the intention of that sentence is just that there is the recording of the significant decision.
So how's a significant decision defined?
That's a good question.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah. Okay, and sorry, what was the final
And the other one was page 43 of the papers at 6.6.4. It's talking about the use of another local authority as a supplier. And my question is whether it is envisaged at all that the combined authority would procure on behalf of the councils. And is that use of the word local authority, does that cover that scenario if it is envisaged? If it isn't envisaged, then, okay.
Okay, so the procurement regs allow for public to public contracting. I think that's just on a case by case basis, a scheme by scheme, project by project, but that is permissible within the regulations.
Thank you very much, Jane. On the other 2 points, the reviewing the standing lists and significant decisions, I think you're going to be coming back to us at some point in the new municipal year, aren't you, with some further work? Would you want to update on those when you next come back to us?
Yeah, sorry, it's just that I've lost the document. I know that's not really very helpful.
No, but yeah,
yeah, and I think it is. I did want to stress that actually. We will want to make some further changes to the contract procedure rules. They will probably be more fundamental. So there are two key aspects in that. One is that obviously the consultation on the government's green paper transforming public procurement closed earlier this year. So we are anticipating some significant changes to legislation. That might not be until late 2022, early 2023. But the other aspect is also we want to do another piece around engaging with staff across the council. So I think we've noticed during COVID that there's been policy notes that have allowed for different types of activity. So that could be extensions or modifications to contracts due to the pandemic. So some practice has changed during the pandemic, and then staff are working from home and we've had new staff. So the amount of contact that we get with staff has been less. So Julie's asked that we do some strong engagement with council staff and do some back to basics training around contract procedure rules and financial procedure rules, just so that staff know what the minimum requirements are, but also know how that we're here to support them.
And so just some clear, and so was I right in saying that you will be coming back to us in the new municipal year with an update?
I think the next time we'll probably come back, unless you want me to come back at any other time, will be with further revisions.
Okay.
On the next 2022 revision.
In that case, would you be able to, subsequent to this meeting, just get back to the points Councillor Smage has raised and copy all members in so that we're
no problem.
We're aware. All right. Thank you very much. Do any other members have any questions or comments? No? Right. Are we all happy to approve the reports and the recommendations as they stand? Yep. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Jane, for all of your work and for speaking to us today. Oh, yeah, John.
Sorry, just
You've muted yourself as you've started speaking, John.
I'm just reflecting, and I'm not sure actually your suggested way forward is probably the best one. I think it would be better if we had a note that came back to the next meeting, because the problem with just sharing something by email with us all is if we do have any questions, you then end up with multiple emails flying around to everybody, and you don't really get that proper comprehensive understanding and explanation. So I think it would be better if a response came back to the next meeting in terms of answering the questions that Liz has raised. And then if any of us do have any comments, thoughts or further questions that are led by that, we've got an opportunity to address them in that way. I just think that might be a better way forward. I don't know what other members think. I'm just not a great fan of email trails.
I think that's absolutely fair, and if it's then noted in the minutes of the next meeting, it's more transparent as well, isn't it? So I think that's we'll approach it that way, John. I think you're right.
Thanks.
No worries. Right then, that brings us on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much on that, members, particularly Councillor Smage and Jane. It's the proposed revisions to financial procedure rules reference to annual council, and I believe it's Martin that's speaking to us on this. Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. So I too have done much the same as Jane has done in the previous session, and gone through and provided you with both a report and a list of the core changes and track changes. I'll confess though that whilst I made some changes to things like numbering and formats, I accepted all those because I didn't think you'd be that interested in those. So the track change that you got from me only shows the place where I've changed the text. It's also true to say that grants forms a key feature of what we've changed in this particular set of financial procedure rules, partly reflecting the comments that Jane's already made about when is it grant, when is it procurement, but also because in the previous version of financial procedure rules, those were in two separate parts, receiving grants and paying out grants. And so the feeling was that it was simpler if we had a single section. So that's a consolidated new section 22. I'll describe that in a little bit more detail when we get there. So like Jane, I'll go through the core changes that are being proposed. And it's probably worth also saying that a bit like your question of Jane, that this is a sort of set of interim changes. There's probably more extensive than we perhaps expected, but particularly in relation to the parts of the financial procedure rules that relate to accounting and budgeting, and particularly budgeting, we're envisaging that there may be more proposals to be made in the summer or early autumn, and also we've realised that we need to rerun through the entire set of procedure rules because they are still written on the basis of a sort of largely paper-based transactions. These days, most of our transactions are electronic, and so we just need to sort of change the emphasis. The reality is, though, that as long as we retain some paper-based transactions, we still need to keep an awful lot of the rules that relate to how you would authorise and gain assurance from a paper-based transaction trail. So that's just a sort of forewarning of what might be coming in the middle part of the next municipal year. But for now, these are the proposals that officers are making to members for now. So at 1.6, we're proposing the additional mention of the words the Financial Management Code of Practice, which is the current best practice in relation to financial management. In section 2 generally, and in section 2.3 particularly, we're proposing that budget strategies should be linked on a basis of up to 5 years rather than the current text of 2 to 4 years. So it's a sort of a fairly minor change, really. Worth just pointing out that we've also added a couple of definitions, but they are of things that have always been mentioned, like earmarked reserves. A few other minor statements or and corrections of words. So, for example, equality impact assessment becomes integrated impact assessment, which is what they're sort of generally called now. Additional words about what the TFO can do in relation to looking after the earmarked reserves. A bit of realignment and a bit of clarification about the rights of a director in relation to capital plan programme works of up to £1 million. That's in 312. Then moving on into section 5, the section on internal audit. There's been sort of some concerns during the period when we've been operating in the rather more decentralised way than we used to, about the ability of internal audit to necessarily get the types of answers and responses it wants. So there's some sort of additional words there, essentially trying to be sure that if we need to see documents or records, they're provided to us reasonably promptly, in a means and at a location that we choose. So that's just drawing to your attention. Ultimately, anyone who didn't who chose not to comply would be required to attend this meeting to explain themselves if that was what you so chose. Section 10 adds in a little bit about the need to verify counterparty transactions through bank accounts. 11.15 adds in additional words that clarify the responsibility when a service chooses to suppress a debt collecting plan or a debt collecting arrangement, so it makes it clearer whose that responsibility lies with. And then moving on, as I envisage, to section 20, well, rather section 22, which is the new grants and loans section. So grants and loans is made up of a small part of section 4 and a part of section, about half of section 20 in the old procedure rules. So these new sections do nevertheless have some words in, so some additional words and changes in. So I'll run through those if that's okay, Chair. So the new section still divides grants receivable and grants and loans payable as one whole paragraph, and it deals with those in that order. And then all the paragraphs are numbered into a new set of sequences. Additional words require that grant applications is only made where we only apply for grants, so grants that are received from third parties, when the project that is proposed to be grant funded aligns with the council's priorities and is fully affordable within budgets, or has a specific approval of cabinet if it's within their delegated level of authority or council. It establishes the right to accept grants from West Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority and government grants of limited value, with only limited restrictions. We've sort of been, members will be well aware, we've been running a huge grant scheme on behalf of the government for business rate grants. The technical authority to do that was somewhat doubtful, though I'm sure it could have been obtained through cabinet or whatever, but it's been run, and so we thought it was better to make it clear that that type of arrangement was acceptable. It's also true that a number of grants are found to each local authority through the West Yorkshire Combined Authority at the moment, what will become the West Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. And so where they're acting as often a government agent to award grants, again, it's appropriate that there is a similar right to accept unlimited value grants from them. The rules also establish an obligation on service directors to ensure that where we do grant expenditure, it aligns with the grant conditions, so we don't finish up in a situation where we've received a grant and then the grant funding body says, well, you're not having the money because you didn't spend what you were supposed to. A little bit more about notifying the chief finance officer, notifying the head of risk, because I sometimes have to sign off to some of these grant forms, and then the matching comment to that made by Jane earlier, which is words that are now in the grant part of the grants and loans parts of the financial procedure rules, to require that what is proposed to fund by grant is not a procurement. Moving on, I've nearly finished now. Additional work obliging. There's additional words at 210 obliging a service director to carry out due diligence on grants, on potential grant recipients. There is a new proposed restriction on officer awarded grants of a very large value. There's absolutely no restriction on any grants awarded by cabinet or under a scheme approved by cabinet, but the slightly less sophisticated grants award arrangements are subject to a proposed new limit of £100,000 per annum. A removal of reference to district committees, adjustment of words to reflect leaving the EU, and finally a new section that makes clear that when we're handing out grants that we can also do those under a government or third party approved grant scheme, if we follow the rules that the funder has installed or imposed upon us. So those, Chair, are the proposals that are being made to you. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your summary there, Martin. Understandable that grants and the EU have taken up a considerable amount of our time with regard to the finance and contract procedure rules this year. Thank you for running us through that so well. John, I believe you've indicated to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And thank you, Martin. Good run through and appreciate the work that the team have put into this. I only actually have one question, and it relates to section 22.10 about grants. And it's 22.10b, and it talks about the due diligence that the service director needs to undertake, which is absolutely fine. But it's just the last point on it. You know, it's absolutely right they should check that they're not obtaining duplicate funding for the same project from us and maybe somewhere else. But it then says, and will not, because of the grant, gain financial betterment. Well, I would have thought there are many occasions where we make grants to various community groups to enable them to grow what they're doing, and there will be financial betterment as a result of that. And this kind of indicates that might be wrong. So I just don't know whether it's just I'm misreading it or whether it's clumsily worded. But you know, we might support a club or something to expand their premises so that they can, you know, increase the income that they're able to achieve, which will help support the voluntary activity that they do. So there would be financial betterment. Seems a strange word anyway, but I just would like to comment on that one, really.
Martin?
Yes, Councillor Taylor's right. It's a slightly clumsy word. It was hard to actually identify what the best words were. It absolutely isn't the intention to forbid the sort of thing you've described, because yes, much grant funding is for things like I mean, sometimes it's like say to improve a kitchen so that a group can provide catering, and that would, I suppose, hence enable the group to potentially run events or where they could make money out of the catering. It's absolutely not meant to stop that. It's meant to. It's meant to stop a situation where effectively the group is looking really to just enhance huge contributions to overheads that they can't justify. Is perhaps the type of thing that I'm sort of looking for. I'm trying to suggest that we should be trying to avoid. So it's a bit of a mute point. It's not unusual in other parties' grant schemes, having read a few recently, that they sort of say that the counterparty, the grant receiving party, shouldn't make a profit in inverted commas from the grant, and it's sort of hard to exactly pinpoint the point where someone shouldn't, where something constitutes the making of profit, particularly for voluntary organisations who I acknowledge are the principal recipients of grant aid. But from time to time, we do give grant aid to commercial organisations as well. An example being, perhaps not doing it at the moment, we have done in the past, improvements to shop fronts and things like that, where we were trying to persuade, we were trying to get the council's objective was to make the place look better, and we were sometimes giving grant to a third party to sort of improve the physical appearance of the building, or the visual appearance of the building. And in those instances, I think the whole point was that we were happy to pay for the contractor's costs and the architect's costs or whatever, but we weren't wanting to contribute to the sort of business costs of even them organising that sort of thing. So that type of development. So it's that type of thing that I think this is trying to forbid, not the not as you rightly say, the giving grants to help an organisation grow or flourish. So it's the.
If I may come back.
Yeah.
A couple of suggestions, Martin. It might be worth putting a footnote in and give some examples of what you are looking for, because I think if this is read dry by a service director somewhere where you're not around to explain it, it could cause some confusion. So I think it would be very, very helpful to put examples in. And I think even the one you use about shop fronts is questionable, because actually if you improve the look of the front of a shop, it may well encourage more people to go into it, and therefore they will get more profit anyway. So I still think you're on dodgy ground. But I think if we just, rather than spend hours over the words, if we just put a footnote in and give some examples of what we mean, that may be much more helpful to service directors that are reading this.
Martin, do you want to comment?
Yeah, through your chair. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Taylor. Yeah, I'll if the committee is happy with that, I'll think about whether we've got an opportunity to put a couple of an extra sentence in about the definition, or as you say, a footnote, and then we'll make sure that that's drawn to the attention of council when it gives consideration to that particular part, so that it's clear that that's been something that you've asked for a variation on, but you haven't necessarily had the ability to formally approve, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, it's a reference to council, so as long as we're able to do that, I believe we are. I don't know if Julie wants to comment on that, but I believe that's okay, is it, Julie?
About adding a footnote?
Adding a footnote. We don't need to get the specific wording right now, do we? We can sort of delegate that to Martin.
No, we can delegate that to Martin, and it will be at the end of the day, corporate governance and audit review the changes to the constitution and make a recommendation to council. We can pick that up. We can pick that up in the report that goes back to council. I was also going to come in and say, actually, you'll note that in both the contract procedurals and the financial procedurals, there's an ability to both Eamon and myself, and I think Martin as well, to issue guidance notes about the interpretation of various parts of the procedure rules. So it's possible, if there are issues moving forwards, for us to issue guidance as well. But a footnote is probably more immediate, I think, and there's an ability for a service director, as you suggest, Councillor Taylor, to sort of see that immediately rather than going off in a link into a guidance note. So if we can do that and provide appropriate wording, we will do that. Okay, is that helpful? Does that answer that?
Yes, thank you, Julie. Are you happy with that, John?
Okay,
yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, excellent. I can see Councillor Smage has her hand up, so I'll bring her in. Liz?
Yeah, thanks. Just a couple of clarifying things. At page 83 of the papers, you said you've added and key stakeholders in the engagement for the budget arrangements, and I'm just wanting to clarify who those are possibly likely to be. On page 85 of the papers, the earmarked reserves. This gives the Chief Finance Officer the ability to draw down earmarked reserves in year and then report to Cabinet. And I'm just wondering, for my own understanding, please, it's probably me that's not understanding this. Do I take it that Cabinet or Council will have already authorised an amount of earmarked reserves that can be used to be drawn down already? Or is there a limit on how much of those reserves can be drawn down without reference beforehand? That's for my own understanding, please. And then on the part 22 about the grants, absolutely agree, we need to have more clarity on this. But again, Martin, I'm confused, and I know it's really easy to confuse me. But at 22.4, you've got limits for officers on what grants they can, level of grants they can accept before it needs to go for approval. And then at 22.5, it seems you've got no limit on the amount of grants that can come from the combined authority or a government department if they don't require a contribution or where the contribution can be fully met from the existing budget. But does that cover, there could be impact on the council from accepting a large budget that does have some financial implications from a government department or the mayoral combined authority. So am I reading it that has no limits on it at all, that 22.5? Have I got that wrong, Martin?
On the first point, Eamon, did you want to come in on the point about the reserves, and then shall I bring Martin in on the second point?
Yeah, happy to do that. I think you mentioned about stakeholders as well. If that's okay. So I can mention that as well. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Eamon.
All right, sorry, I've just got a bit of a delay at this end. So the issue of the earmark reserve, if it's a new reserve or a change to an existing reserve, there is an approval process for that through Cabinet and report to Council as well, periodically through the year. So you're absolutely right. I haven't got delegated authority, or we're not proposing delegated authority for the Chief Finance Officer to make up or to approve a brand new earmark reserve, or that approval process would go through Cabinet and report to Council as well. And at some points of the year as well, we do it at the same time. I'll give you a recent example around the transformation reserve using flexible capital receipts policy at a local level that was actually approved through Budget Council. So it's then about the application and the drawdown of that reserve. So ensuring, from my perspective, that it's drawn down in line with a specific purpose for what that reserve was set out to deliver, and then report that periodically through monitoring to Cabinet, and as required through the financial strategy update in October, and through Budget Council in February, and also the outturn report, the financial outturn report, which will be coming to Cabinet and Council in due course. So I hope that clarifies that point. On stakeholder issue, I think that's just put in as a kind of sort of generic term, but we do have a budget engagement process as part of the budget setting. We've used online engagement with residents and also other key stakeholders through the partnership executive and Chamber of Commerce, in terms of businesses and voluntary sector community groups, third sector leaders, health partners, all those kind of key anchor stakeholders as well. So they're included as a matter of course, and feedback is reported in the annual budget report in terms of consultation feedback. But it's not a once a year session. I think something that we're aiming to do anyway going forward is about having that regular consultation through the year. And I'd also include the place standard feedback as well. In terms of capturing some of that local information. So that's something that we're, I think, aiming to improve on anyway, in terms of what stakeholder engagement and consultation is through the budget process. So it's not seen as just a snapshot at budget time. It's something that we need to build up through the year as well, as part of intelligence and insight. I think those were the two main points from me. Is Martin coming in on the other?
Yeah. Martin, do you want to come in, and then we'll go back to Councillor Smedge?
Yes, Chair. Thank you. I mean, Eamon might want to contribute to the other questions that Councillor Smedge asked as well, because they relate to the sort of budgeting part of the grant section. So I agree with Councillor Smedge. It's a little bit confusing. What this is saying is that that if we're taking a grant scheme from a third party, which can include government and WICA, if those funds are not absorbable within existing service budgets, then what section 22.4 is indicating is that a service director can accept, if they've got the sufficient resources that have then been vied in accordance with the environment rules that are in the revenue or capital budget, service directors are then authorised to offer a grant and the subsequent grant conditions up to £500,000, and strategic directors are authorised to offer a grant in the similar circumstances up to 5% of the gross revenue budget of the service which is taking the grant, or in the case of capital, £1 million. So that's the sort of rule there. So essentially, we have to have identified enough resource from within our own resources through a violent process, which is sometimes delegated to officers, or in other circumstances requires cabinet or council approval for our own contributions. And if that is the case, then as a consequence of that, the director, or in some cases the strategic director, is authorised to accept grants of up to £500,000 or £1 million, or a slightly different value in relation to revenue grants. Councillor Smage is also absolutely right to question what it's saying in relation to WICA, WIMCA and government grants. What it's saying there is that we can accept a grant of any value if it's unrestricted and it causes no if it causes no impact on the council's policies, or if the council has already set aside the relevant budget contributions to meet its share. It's worth noting that an awful lot of the planned WICA grants are for sort of things like highways projects, where we've already largely set aside the objectives, and they're usually included in our capital plan. And sometimes the only issue with WICA grants is their acceptance as they flow in, which is not always necessarily in accordance with the way the council had accepted or expected. So the ability to take WICA grants and government grants, which have got no impact on the council's own financial consequences, is unlimited. That is also true where there is a council contribution that's already been identified or can be identified within the current operating practices. So actually, it's not massively different to the to the rest of the FPRs. Not sure that answers Councillor Smage's questions, or whether Eamon wants to add anything else.
Eamon, do you want to add anything before we go to Councillor Smage?
No, I think Martin's kind of covered it. I think as well, trying to expand the grant section as well is clearly it's recognising that the level of grant offers that coming into the council has increased exponentially over probably the last 18 months or so for a whole host of reasons, and that includes COVID grants, but other grant regimes, practically announced at some points practically on a daily basis, particularly by government. And I think the expanded wording is an attempt just to sort of make reference to the fact that there are increasing grant regimes, be it through WICA or MCAs, it's mayoral combined authorities it's going to be, and also government as well, and trying to make sense of where those grants are actually, we're just passporting them through, like with some of the COVID grants. They're highly prescriptive, we're just applying an administrative function, and the amounts as well. If they're above certain amounts, we do record them as well, as required within the officer delegation scheme, and also we report them on a regular basis as well through our established monitoring procedures and budget procedures where required as well for additional information. So I think it's just really a nod to the fact that the level and number and types of grants has increased quite significantly, not just for us but many councils, I think.
Thank you, Eamon. Councillor Smage, do you want to come back?
Yeah. Thanks. I understand why you've put these paragraphs in. I absolutely understand that. It's just that 22.5 says that where the council is required to make no contribution, but it doesn't talk about where there's no impact. Martin, you mentioned about policies, no impact on policies. These are financial procedure rules, and they're talking about finance. Do you know what I mean? There's a balance there, and I'm just asking about that. That's for clarity on that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Was there anything that either Martin or Eamon wanted to come back on that?
Chair, is it all right if I come back on Councillor Smagey's clarification point?
Of course, yeah.
Maybe it's something that myself and Martin and Julia can just take away and have another look at the wording, because I think elsewhere in the financial procedure rules there's reference to certain delegations around budgets that can be made at strategic director, service director, provided that they're in line with the service plan objectives of that service area. So maybe some wording to that effect, and so that will clarify in terms of assessment of the impact. So if it's a continuation of delivery of key service objectives, and we've clarified that as officers, then that might give some scope for clarification on some of, maybe on Councillor Smagey's point about what the specific impact is, because I appreciate it, and it's a good point to raise. Actually, it might not be absolutely clear to everybody reading them.
Yeah, I think it could be large amounts of money, this, without any reference to cabinet. Do you know what I mean? And it just needs a bit of clarity, I think. Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for raising it, Liz, and thank you for that, Eamon. That sounds like a good way to deal with it. Are there any other comments or questions from any other members on this report? No, so we're all happy to accept the recommendations with regard to the point made just by Liz and Eamon moments ago. Excellent. Thank you very much, members, and thank you very much to all the officers involved. I just want to point out that we've made it through 120 pages of officer reports, and Councillor Taylor's not yet found one spelling error, so that is high praise indeed to all of the officers involved. Long may it continue. The next item on the agenda is item 8, which is the proposed revisions to terms of reference for the Health and Wellbeing Board, reference to council. So I'll invite the officer presenting on this to come in. Is it Phil?
Thanks, Councillor Simpson. I'm now very anxious that somebody might find a spelling mistake.
No pressure.
I'm Phil Longworth. Part of my responsibility in the council is to support the Health and Wellbeing Board. Members all know that the Health and Wellbeing Board is actually a subcommittee of council, and so any changes to its membership, there is actually in the regulations a requirement to consult the Health and Wellbeing Board before we update it. So we did that at the most recent meeting, and the proposals included in this report have been approved by the Health and Wellbeing Board. I think the changes are really a reflection of the changes in context the Health and Wellbeing Board's operating in. So there have been several things that have changed since we last changed the membership in terms of reference. And probably an indication of the speed of change that's happening at the moment is when we changed the terms of reference last year, that was the first time since the board had been established in 2013. We're coming again with a set of changes, and part of the report highlights the fact that because of the publication of the white paper recently, that are going to instigate a further set of changes in the health and social care system, it might well be that we'll need to come back before the end of the municipal year with another set of changes to make sure that we can fulfil the responsibilities of the Health and Wellbeing Board in the new context set out in the Health and in the white paper. So the changes, just to highlight them very quickly, members will be aware that the two CCGs that we did have in Kirklees merged on the 1st of April, and there is actually a statutory requirement to have representation from the CCG on the Health and Wellbeing Board. So one of the changes is just to tidy that up. Another important development has been the emergence of primary care networks as a critical part of the health and social care system. And so the board felt it was important to make sure we got formal representation from the primary care networks. But reflecting the fact there are 9 and not wanting to make the board a very unwieldy entity, we are actually seeking a representative from the primary care networks rather than a representative from each of the 9. We've also changed some of the supporting structures underneath the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we did previously have 2 separate groups, one that looked at commissioning issues and one that was all the providers of health and care services collaborating. Those two groups have now formally merged into an integrated health and care leadership board. And so again, it seemed appropriate to make sure there was a representation from that into the health and wellbeing board. And we've also, in collaboration with Councillor Kendrick and Mel Meggs, the Director of Children's Services, amended the accountability of the Children and Young People's Partnership to make sure that the Health and Wellbeing Board can give formal sort of oversight to the work of the Children and Young People's Partnership. So those have been the local changes that have necessitated the proposals in the paper. As I just mentioned, the government produced a white paper a couple of months ago that means that there will, during this year, be legislation brought forward about changes to the West Yorkshire level of the integrated care system that'll put that onto a statutory footing. The white paper did confirm that the Health and Wellbeing Board arrangements should continue, but what we don't know is whether or not there'll be any requirement in the new legislation to formalise the relationship between the Health and Wellbeing Board and the integrated care system. So again, that just highlights the fact we might well need to come back again with some proposals in year. One of the things that's a characteristic of all the changes, both locally and what was been signalled in the white paper, is a shift to a much more sort of collaborative approach to the work across health and social care. And so the Councillor Smage will be aware of this from a role on the West Yorkshire scrutiny. There are emerging structures for the acute trust to collaborate, the mental health trust to collaborate, the community services providers to collaborate. There's currently a formal joint committee of the CCGs. So whilst we do know that the CCGs will cease to exist, assuming the legislation is passed at the end of this financial year, what we're not clear yet is exactly what that new landscape will look like exactly. Yeah, so the proposals are to make the changes to reflect to the membership to reflect those changes, and there's one slight change to the terms of reference to reflect the role of the Health and Wellbeing Board in terms of oversight of the Children and Young People's Partnership. So hopefully those are clear. This is the third version of being able to highlight changes, because we went for the additions in red and deletions are struck through in the so I think between the three of us we've covered every single approach to highlighting changes. So hopefully these are clear.
Thank you very much, Phil, for all your work, and that was a really informative summary as well, so thank you for that. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I had spotted not a spelling error, but a full stop and a comma, which I didn't bother raising. I thought that was just being petty. Thanks for this report. My only comment on it is it's just, and it's not a change, it's something that was there already in Appendix 1 about voting members, which just seems an odd way of describing something. So voting members includes 3 members of Kirklees Council's cabinet, which is absolutely fine. Then it says one of whom may be the leader. But again, one of whom may not be the leader. So I'm not sure what the point of actually having that comment in there is, because it can be the leader or not. But yes, if the requirement is 3 members of the cabinet, why not just say 3 members of the cabinet? I'm not sure whether there's a reason for that additional wording, but it's just a comment, really.
There is a reason. The primary legislation actually uses very similar wording, and so I think when this was originally drafted in 2012, and it went through the processes at the time, it was trying to make sure that we just reflected what was in the legislation. I appreciate it does now sound slightly anachronistic, but
yeah. Right, thank you very much for that, Phil. I think it's a fairly straightforward report, unless anyone's got any further comments or questions about it. No? Oh, Liz.
Sorry. Sorry.
But we got away with it then. Go on.
Yeah. Sorry, Phil. Can you just clarify the timelines that you're using for some more amendments? Because yes, when the ICS white paper etc. comes in, you could very easily need some more changes to your terms of reference. It's how the representative from the Children and Young People's Partnership will work going forward, as to whether there needs to be more of a balance. Do you know what I mean? Because you've only got one representative there at the moment, and so my question is, are you reviewing how that will work going forward, so that when you need to do some changes later on, you can have a look at whether that is whether there needs to be more representation? Thank you.
In terms of the timeline, we don't know what the legislative timetable is, so we can't comment. They have said they're going to publish that soon, but no idea when that'll be. In terms of the representation of the Children and Young People's Partnership, what we have done is just highlighted the fact the Director of Children's Services obviously is a key member of the Children and Young People's Partnership, but there are at the moment several other people who are on the Health and Wellbeing Board who are also involved in the Children and Young People Partnership arrangements, probably most notably Councillor Kendrick, who chairs the Health and Wellbeing Board, and obviously that's her portfolio. And again, there are other members of the board who are involved because some of the representation from the CCG is involved in that. So one of the things we are doing through the development of the new arrangements is to do a piece of work to map who's involved in which board, and to reiterate the fact that when people are on the Health and Wellbeing Board, they're bringing the full range of their experience and involvement into that. And hopefully making sure we have those sort of properly rounded conversations, rather than just relying on one person to reflect issues of concern to the Children and Young People's Partnership.
Thank you, Phil. Was there anything you wanted to come back on, Liz?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I can't see anyone else indicating, so we're happy to accept the reports, the members. Thank you very much. That brings us on to item, and before we move on, thank you very much, Phil, and everyone involved for all the work. Of course, it's much appreciated. So we're now on to item 9, which is the letter to and response from WICA. So this, of course, relates to what we discussed at our last meeting, which followed a significant amount of work that we and officers and other members who we invited to take part did on the emerging scrutiny arrangements for the mayoral combined authority. Members will remember that we had a really constructive, I think, discussion at the last meeting. There was much agreement, and members delegated authority to myself to make representations, as well as forwarding our views onto Cabinet for them to make representations, but to directly make representations ourselves, by myself as chair, to the combined authority on the matters that we'd come to a cross-party agreement on. So the letter that I wrote is contained in the minutes, and I also attached the notes from the workshop that we held and the officer's report as well, so that they have the full details and we're absolutely clear about the extent of the cross-party agreement that we had as part of those. And members will also find Ben's response, Ben Still, who's the managing director of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority at the moment in time, his response, which was received promptly and which I was grateful to have received so quickly in response to my letter. So this is an opportunity for members to make any comments on this. If members are okay, I'll kick us off quite briefly. Although obviously I'm grateful for all the work that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority have done on this. It's not easy, and timescales have been tight, and I'm grateful for them to getting back to me so quickly. I don't quite think all of our concerns that we agreed on a cross-party basis were completely addressed. I think it'd be fair to say. It's good to see, one of the things that we recommended was the sort of public question time for the incoming mayor to do some direct engagement with residents and members of the public, and it's good to see that those are being included and developed as part of the proposals. But of course, that will be dependent on the choices made by the incoming mayor as to whether those go ahead or not. But we did make a number of detailed proposals. Firstly, around holding an additional meeting of full council to hold the mayor to account annually. Those weren't responded to in the response specifically, and as members will be aware, having read the report, we are therefore progressing in the next item on the agenda, the amendments to the Constitution, with putting that meeting into our Constitution, because we were all clear when we discussed it and in our representations to WICA that that was a red line for us, and it'll be up to, we're making that stand now, and it'll be up to the incoming mayor and the combined authority going forward as to whether they decide to engage in that or not, but we will be creating that meeting. We also made a number of points around that not just being a one-off or a PR stunt, but ongoing scrutiny and working in partnership with having local scrutiny working with regional scrutiny, because I think all of the issues come down to one fundamental view that I think we share, which is that the combined authority has been too distant and too exclusive, and I think that's somewhat embodied in the response, in that the discussions about how the creation of the mayoral scrutiny have been slightly exclusive, in that they've taken place at that regional level, and I'm not at all doing down the work that's been done by those officers or councillors. But at the bottom of the first page of the letter, it details some recommendations from their Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee, recommending that all scrutiny chairs in West Yorkshire meet at least twice a year to discuss common issues, share work programmes and identify areas of common scrutiny, and that the committee improve their direct engagement with local councillors and the public. Now, whilst those are welcome sentiments, for me, we made some more fundamental and detailed points that I think would be weren't unreasonable and would be more effective in ensuring that the combined authority is embedded in local scrutiny and isn't able to forget or leave behind any part of the region. And I think it's important that we continue to make that case, and I don't see those two fairly short bullet points being completely satisfactory at the moment in time. So I'd be interested, particularly on because one of the recommendations we made was about, because we've been discussing accountability panels, and we thought that the best way to go about that might be through our Overview Management and Scrutiny Committee having at least an annual meeting to assess progress against plans and stated goals. I thought that was a very reasonable suggestion. It's not been picked up in the response. So I'd be interested to hear in particular what Councillor Smage thinks as to regard that and that first bullet point about scrutiny chairs in West Yorkshire meeting twice a year to discuss common issues. That bullet point as to whether how she feels about whether that would be sufficient. So I'll open it up now to other members. Councillor Taylor, you've indicated first.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is a really difficult one, because I suspect that the combined authority are being careful about what they commit to until the mayor's appointed, because it's the mayor that will direct and drive a lot of this. So I don't think we should be too critical of them at the moment. We've made our points clear. We as politicians can make those points clear to the people that are hoping to become the mayor as well. And I think it would be more appropriate to look at it once the mayor has been appointed, because I think we've made our points. We need to continue to make those points and make them quite strongly. But I can understand why there's some reticence from the combined authority to commit to too much at the moment, or be too clear about what their intentions are, because that will be politically driven by whoever is the mayor in, just over a couple of weeks' time. So I hear you, Will, but I just think it's too early to be suggesting that things are not being done in the way that we might like them to be done, because we don't know how they're going to be done yet, and we won't know until there's a mayor in place and they make their intentions clear. So I think we should just hold fire for the time being, note this, and then revisit it and try and get some early engagement with the mayor once the mayor's appointed. Happy to hear what other members feel.
I appreciate that, John, and I do agree with it. Maybe my tone came across as more critical than I intended in that, but I appreciate that. Councillor Firth.
Thank you, Chair. My point is, we've raised these points with WICA. Has there been any liaison with the other 4 local authorities with their corporate governance and audit? And are you aware of whether they've raised similar points or not?
Thanks, Eric. I've not done that directly, but I do know, because I've obviously had a lot of discussion with the monitoring officer and officers who have been involved, that there have been many discussions with the other constituent councils at that level and between those officers who are leading on it. Julie, would you want to, or be able to come in and provide a response to Councillor Firth on those discussions?
Yes, I can do. As you know, there have been a number of conversations across the 5 West Yorkshire authorities leading up to the change to West Yorkshire Combined Authority to make it mayoral. There have been, most recently, obviously, the councils considered through their version of audit committee. Not all of them did the same thing, actually. Some of them went directly to cabinet to make the decision around the protocol on concurrent powers. Obviously, we brought this here on the 9th of March. So I think there's been a mixed approach. Some have gone through their audit committee and to cabinet, or some just to cabinet to look at that. I suspect that we have done a much bigger piece of work because of the workshop that we held, which involved this committee and the chairs of scrutiny panels and the chair of the management committee, as well as other members from across all parties. I think we've probably done a bigger piece of work and fed back in perhaps more detail than others, but certainly they've considered it at either cabinet or in some cases cabinet and their equivalent of corporate governance and audit committee. They all have slightly different names, obviously, and do slightly different things, but yes, they have considered it, possibly not to the level we have.
May I come back?
Yeah, go on, Eric.
I know it's very well. It's almost too late, isn't it? This municipal year. But going forward, would it be possible to share what we've done with the other local authorities to see if we can actually all start singing off the same hymn sheet?
Yeah, I think that's a. Oh, sorry, Jill, do you want to come in?
This information has been shared with all of the other local authorities. Councillor Firth, it was shared as part of some of the discussions about some of the feedback, but probably. As you've noted, some of the work on this has been sort of at the beginning of the year, and it doesn't leave a lot of time left to make some of the changes that we and possibly others might wish to make. So yes, I think that it will remain or can remain on the agenda if there's a wish to do that.
Yeah. If I can come in on that, I reckon if you want to come back in after that, that's absolutely fine. I think you're right, and I think it goes to John's point as well, in that I think that's something we should do once the mayor is in place, because I think the new mayor will, or at least should, want to get off on a good footing with each of their constituent councils. And I know we have a lot of shared concerns and interests across the councils, so I think working together to create that effective partnership of scrutiny and accountability is something that we should, and I imagine will do. Did you want to come back in, Eric?
No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Eric. Councillor Smage.
Yes, thank you. And I think perhaps I just need to be careful in my comments in respect of this, as we are where we are in the current process. I agree there are some things here that will be for the mayor to be discussed with the mayor, whoever they are. But there are also some points that should be being discussed at this moment in time. And as we are, and others will be, changes in constitutions, etc., happens at this time of year, and therefore anything in relation to public questions, etc., at meetings and things like this, those are constitutional changes. So there are, I think there's several areas here. There are some areas which would be constitutional changes, and some areas that would be protocols, and some areas that would be for discussion. And I think it's a whole discussion that needs to keep on going. It needs to there needs to be some more discussions with the combined authority after this, following on from this letter. Do you know what I mean? It's an ongoing process that we need to continue to engage and engage with the new mayor. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Liz. And you're absolutely right. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Right, there's nothing to resolve from that. We're just there to be published and facilitate that discussion. So thank you very much, everyone. That brings us on to the item 10, changes to the council's constitution, reference to annual council. I believe that's Julie, so I'll bring Julie in.
I'm going to ask David to present the report, if that's okay.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Right, good morning, members. This report, it's hopefully it's fairly straightforward. It details it. We've skipped a year. It's normally an annual report, but there wasn't one last year, so it's effectively covering any changes that have been made to the Constitution in the last 2 years that have been made using the delegated powers. But it's also looking at forwards in terms of what issues have arisen that have prompted a need to make some changes. That doesn't sound too cumbersome. So what we've got is we've got a summary of the changes that have been made using the delegated powers that the monitoring officer has. Now, those delegated powers, as I'm sure the committee know, relate to correcting typos and changing job titles. So effectively, it's things that are fairly minor and don't really need to come back through this committee and on to full council for approval. What the monitoring officer isn't able to do is make amendments for clarificatory purposes. So there are some amendments in this report that have been highlighted by the governance team, where they felt perhaps we needed to make some clarification around some of the points in the Constitution. So we'll look at those. In part 2 of the report, information required to take a decision, where we're literally going through the entirety of the Constitution and saying whether or not there's any changes that have been made, changes that are sought approval for, or whether there's some ongoing work, or whether there's nothing at all going on. So in part 1, someone explains there's no changes proposed there. Part 2 in the articles, there have been some changes made using monitoring officer powers of delegation. Those are all listed in Appendix 1. They were mainly to correct minor errors and update job titles, which have changed in the last 24 months in some areas. There is a planned review of references to legislation. Members will note there's a list of acts of parliament and regulations in that part of the Constitution. One of the things that we need to do is to make sure that that's still current and add anything where necessary. One of the obvious ones is the legislation around coronavirus. That's clearly legislation that has an impact on how we operate and creates obligations for the council, so that will probably need to be added in there. There aren't any requests for approval of changes on part 2 here today, but the policy framework in Article 4 is subject to review, and if there are any changes that come out of that review that are sought, then they'll come through this process. So they'll come to corporate governance and then on to council to consider. Part 3, responsibility for functions. Obviously, 2.07 amendments to the terms of reference for Health and Wellbeing Board, that's already been discussed here today. There have been 6 amendments made by the monitoring officer just in terms of minor changes in terms of cabinet members portfolios and cabinet member names, because the constitution actually names cabinet members, and so every time there's a change in a cabinet member, then that results in the need to make some amendments to the constitution itself. Personnel committee, there may be some proposed changes to the terms of reference to the personnel committee. I know that's something that Deborah Lucas has been looking at. If there are any changes, again, that'll come back through this process. There'll be a report to corporate governance and audit, which, subject to comments and approval, will then go on to council. Rules of procedure. This is probably where we've had the biggest change. CPR 51's been added. This is the council procedure rule that permits us to have meetings like the one we're having today, i.e. meetings that are remote. Before those changes came into place, we couldn't have legally held this meeting. So it was something that was added simply as an emergency measure, really, to permit council business to carry on. So what members may be aware of is that the powers to hold meetings like this come to an end on the 6th of May 2021, unless anything happens in between that allows them to continue. Some members may know that there's an application to the High Court for a ruling on the interpretation of the 1972 Act, and it was put to the courts that they could interpret the Act as allowing this sort of meeting to continue. Now, that hearing took place yesterday. Hopefully, a judgment will come out relatively shortly, given the basically urgency of the matter, because 6th of May is not really that far away. So we'll know when that comes out what the position is going to be moving forward. Obviously, depending on what happens, then that CPR may be redundant, or it may be able to continue, or it may need looking at and revising. But again, that's something that we can look at if we need to. Now we get on to a raft of clarificatory amendments that are fairly minor, but necessarily because they're clarification amendments, they can't be made by the monitoring officer, so they have to come back through this committee and on to council. So these have largely been highlighted by the governance team, things that have come up in meetings that they've sort of overseen during the last 24 months, where they thought, well, actually, if we actually clarified this, it would deal with misunderstandings. So they're minor, fairly minor clarification amendments. I trust members have read through those and can understand the additions of the wording. It's highlighted in the report itself. What I've done is where there's been added recommended wording, I've put that in bold and italic, so hopefully it'll stand out to members in where we are. There's an amendment to CPR 5 which concerns the introduction of the West Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, and again it comes back to the previous agenda item that was being discussed about the mayor coming to address the council and be an element of reporting back, but also an element of scrutiny involved in that. So the CPR, as proposed here, is that there should be at least one meeting of the council in each municipal year at which the mayor is invited to attend and address the council. Again, a number of typos and formatting errors have been corrected over the last 24 months. So then going through the rest of the rules we have, been a minor amendment to the access to information procedure rules using delegated powers. Budget and policy framework was no proposed amendments. Executive procedure rules, minor amendments just to reflect job titles. Financial procedure rules, those have already been subject to a report. Ditto contract procedure rules, they've been subject to a report here today. Overview and scrutiny procedure rules, no proposed amendments to those. And the Officer Employment Procedure rules, again, no proposed amendments to those rules. So Part 5, Codes and Protocols. Members' Code of Conduct, as I'm sure members will be aware, the monitoring officer and the council are under a duty to review the code of conduct, but members will be aware of the Committee on Standards in Public Life and the sort of effect that's had on the whole issue of standards and codes of conduct. So there aren't any present amendments to the code of conduct being proposed, but that's not to say there won't be any in due course. One of the recommendations of the Committee on Standards in Public Life when it reported in Jan 2019 was that we hold, or the Council holds, a consultation on standards and take that out to the wider sort of stakeholder community of Kirklees. Now we've done that, and you know, I hope everybody's contributed in your role as councillors or parish councillors. We actually got quite a phenomenal response, actually. We got far more people responded than we'd been anticipating, and what that actually meant, given that some of the questions weren't all structured questions, which are relatively easy to interpret. There was lots of open-ended questions where we're inviting comments, and we've probably got best part of 2,500 comments altogether to wade through. And the original plan was to report to the Standards Committee, look at what was going on, look at any changes, come here, then on to annual council. But it became too much of a big task to try and do that, and we would not have been able to do it justice in the time we had. So the proposal really is that we'll do some more analysis of the comments that have been made. Then standards will be convened, a report will be prepared. We're looking at doing some consultation workshops as well, looking at the various issues that have arisen. They're effectively two strands. There's, do we need to change the code of conduct in light of the consultation process? And then there's the other strand is, what do we think as a council of the LGA's draft code of conduct? So those two strands that need to come together before any concrete proposals may be put about changes to the code of conduct. So that's all work that's going to take place over the summer. If it all runs according to timetable, then the next meeting of the Standards Committee in the autumn will be considering any proposals that may come from the work we're doing over the summer. So then that'll feed through to corporate governance if there are changes proposed, and on to council. With regards to the other protocols, monitoring officer protocol, no proposed amendments. Protocol for planning committees and subcommittees, no proposed amendments. Decision making on ward issues. It is proposed that this will be reviewed and referred initially to standards with any proposed changes, and then again onto corporate governance and to council as appropriate with any recommendations. The same applies to the protocol on the protocol on the role of representatives and key outside bodies in representing the interests of the council. That's an ongoing piece of work. It's proposed that it's going to be reviewed. A lot of these things, in an ideal world without the pressures of the pandemic, may have been looked at sooner, and I know there was reference to this in the previous report that was before this committee. Officers' Code of Conduct, again, that's something that's probably due a review, is overdue for review. Again, if any changes are proposed, that'll come back through this committee before going on to council. Public speaking at planning committees and subcommittees, no proposed amendments to that one currently. Ditto licensing and safety committee protocol. And the protocol for effectively councillors and officers, that was touched on in the standards survey. So what's going to happen with that is probably when we've done a more in-depth analysis of the responses from members about interfacing with officers and officers about their experiences of working with members, that may have an impact on that particular protocol. So again, that's something that may or may not come back if there are any changes proposed. Safeguarding protocol, no proposed amendments. Protocol for online meetings. That was introduced at the same time as the Council Procedure Rule 51 that we've already discussed, effectively working hand in hand with that. So we had the power to have the meetings and we have the protocol to sort of effectively look at the actual nuts and bolts of effectively running meetings online as compared to running them in person. Again, that may change come May the 6th if things change. So that could be fluid. That could change. There's also the concurrent functions protocol, which is a protocol proposed to be added to the Constitution following the introduction of the mayoral combined authority. So it's already been considered here and by Cabinet, but my understanding, and Julie may pitch in and correct if I'm wrong, is that it hasn't been signed off by all the constituent councils so far. So it's not yet in its final form. It's only in draft form. So that's really about it. If we go down to the recommendations and reasons, there's a number here. It's recommended that this committee notes the changes made to the Constitution using delegated powers between 2019 and 2021, which are listed in Appendix 1. It's also recommended that this committee approve the proposed changes to the Council's Constitution that are set out in paragraphs 211, 212, 213, 214 and 216, and the accompanying relevant appendices that highlight where those sit in. The committee note the further work being undertaken to keep the Council's Constitution under review, notes the proposed further work in respect to standards in the Code of Conduct, and finally recommends to Council that they note and approve the above recommendations and delegate authority to the Service Director for Legal Governance and Commissioning to make the appropriate amendments to the Constitution which may be agreed by the Council, as well as any consequential amendments to the Constitution to reflect changes agreed. So obviously the appendices, we've got Appendix 1, which is a list of all the changes that have been made over the last 2 years using delegated powers, and it also lists those that were made following the last time that a report was put before annual council. That will be 2 years ago. And then we've got a track change copy of the council procedure rules, which hopefully makes it clear where the amendments are sitting in and where they appear. So that's the report. So.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you to everyone who's worked on it, but particularly yourself, David, for presenting to us and doing so whilst being the most immaculately dressed member of the meeting.
You haven't seen me stand up yet.
Councillor Taylor has indicated to speak first, and I can see Liz has got a hand up, so I'll bring John in first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David, for a comprehensive response. A couple of points I wanted to pick up, really. 2.34, councillors and officers in Kirklees, a protocol for working effectively.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit disappointed about our failure to link things up properly, really, because this is an area where both myself and Councillor Cathy Scott have done a lot of work over the last 3 years through the Democracy Commission, where we held meetings with councillors, we held meetings with officers, we held joint meetings with both, and we pulled together some summaries of that, but that doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. And I was going to say complain's probably too strong a word. I have made comment to the Chief Executive on a number of occasions that just announcing the Democracy Commission is being closed down isn't sufficient, and we need to have a review of what was in progress, what is still outstanding, and how that work's being picked up and by whom. Still see no sight of it. And here you are going off to start looking at the protocol independently when there's a whole host of work that's already been done by another team. So can we at least make sure that we're joined up? So, you know, sort of reaching out to the people who are supporting the Democracy Commission and seeing where they are with all of that work, because we should be pulling this together and doing it once, not doing it several times. My other question is on 2.14 about the proposed amendment CPR 38.6, and I can't seem to tie that up with Appendix 1, which indicates when changes were made to the Constitution. So I wonder if you can just clarify for me when that change was actually made to the Constitution, because it doesn't seem to be covered in the Appendix 1.
No, I can clarify that. With regards to your first point, yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's really important that we hook in and hook up rather with the Democracy Commission and take advantage of the previous work that's been done in that area. There's no point, shared ideas are always better than not shared ideas. So I think that's a perfectly valid point. And, I will ensure that when we get to that point where we're looking at that, then we do involve people that have already been looking at that. With regards to your query on 2.14, that's not a change that's yet been made. It's a change that we're asking to be approved here to go on to annual council for recommendation. So that's a recommended change rather than change that has been made.
So before you come back in, John, can I just ask, I think Julie wanted to come in response to one of your points as well. So can I just bring Julie in and then we'll go back to you, John, is that all right?
Yes, it was just to reiterate the point that David's made actually in terms of the review of the member officer protocol. It's certainly not the intention to do it independently or separately. I think it was very clear when we got the feedback from the survey that there was a need to get on with that piece of work, and it's certainly not ignoring the fact that you've had those conversations as part of the Democracy Commission. So hopefully that reassures you. There are some proposals. We'll need to take some proposals forward about how we do that, and we need to get in comments and take into account the work that you and Councillor Scott have been doing, and indeed other officers who've been working with you and the Democracy Commission. It hasn't been forgotten about, John. I hope that reassures you.
John, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to Julie first. I mean, if you can take back the message from me again, Julie, that we need to complete this piece of work around what was outstanding from the Democracy Commission if we're closing it down. I don't know who's owning that. I don't know where that's disappeared to. Jackie said she would sort it out, but nothing's happened. And I'm getting a bit frustrated that I feel like I've wasted a few, I was going to say a few years. It certainly wasn't a few years, but many meetings contributing as other members have. And then it's just kind of just dropped in a corner and forgotten all about. And it's frustrating that a lot of officers and members put time into trying to improve those working relationships, and it's just effectively been thrown away. Nothing has happened with it over the last 2 years, and I mean pre-pandemic. So if you would take that message back for me, please. I keep trying to make the point, but clearly it's not getting through. It's not seen as something that's particularly important. We need to finish off pieces of work and not start new pieces of work until we've completed the last one. Just back on the other point about the proposed amendment, when we had a decision to make about an appointment of new chair of standards, as a Conservative group, we proposed Councillor Bill Armour, and we told we couldn't propose him because procedure rules didn't allow it to. Yet actually, if we read this procedure rule before it's been changed, it would have allowed it to, because the group business manager has the ability to change the membership of the party's membership of groups at any time. So we could have allowed the amendment to go through, and it feels like we're trying to close the door after the horse is bolted here. So we're changing the procedure rule to cover up for the fact that the advice we gave back in whenever it was, December or January, wasn't strictly correct. So if you read that procedure rule without the amendment, it just says that the chair and deputy chair of the committee shall be a member of the council, which Councillor Bill Armour clearly was. So he could have, I mean, it's almost a moot point because there's no doubt that Councillor Firth would have still won the vote. But I think it's important that we allow people to have the opportunity to vote, and we shouldn't be retrospectively changing things. It was clear that that rule, as it stood, would have allowed Bill to have been proposed to be chair of that committee. And I have no problem with changing it if that improves things and clarifies it. I'm not objecting to the change. I just object to the way this has been handled and the way it was presented to us back at the council meeting back in, I can't remember which month it was, to be honest. It was a couple of months ago, where we as a group were not allowed to put forward our preferred candidate, and we're told it was against the procedure rules. But clearly that procedure rule was being changed after the event, not before the event. So I'll probably just leave it there. I don't necessarily expect a comment on it, but just expressing my exasperation about the way things were done. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I think the first point you made is important. A lot of people, including yourself and Councillor Scott and the officers, put a lot of effort into the Democracy Commission. It's important that any outstanding work is picked up and concluded before it is concluded, if you understand what I mean. So I'm sure that's been heard, and I hope it'll be picked up. Perhaps it might be something, John, that we could ask would it be corporate scrutiny that might be able to ask something to come back to there? Would that be the right place if we wanted to follow it up in terms of scrutiny?
Yeah.
Could ask Councillor Cooper. Perhaps that might be a way for you to explore it. Julie, did you want to come back in on the second point? And then I'll bring Councillor Smage in. Sorry for your wait, Liz.
I know, Councillor Taylor, you said you didn't want a response, but I'm happy to try and explain that if that would help. So I think it was actually at the November council meeting when there was a discussion, there was a vote on replacing the chair of standards. You are correct that there is an ability for someone to nominate a change of the committee, but unfortunately the nomination hadn't taken place, and there's a time period within which that has to be done. This is a clarification which clarifies that it's not a co-optee that can be then can be nominated as the chair, and I'm sorry if you think it looks like it's closing the door after the horse is bolted. It was here to clarify that it's actually someone who's a member of the committee or subcommittee rather than somebody who's a co-optee. That's the reason why that was done. And I know that there was quite a lot of correspondence after the meeting rather than a discussion at it, going through the details of the council procedure rule and the rules that applied in relation to this and substituting. So that's the reason. I'm sorry that if you think it looks like it's closing the door after the horse is bolted, that's not the intention. It's to clarify that it's not a co-optee who can be put forward as the chair of a committee.
Thanks for the clarity, Julie. If it's all right, John, I'll bring Liz in now. I assume you don't want to come back in on that. Liz.
Thank you. My question is about the item for the mayoral visit to council. It's the actual procedure is actually providing a mechanism for what was asked for, that the mayor be able to come to Kirklees Council and update councillors on what the work of the mayor. But then you are restricting the meeting. And we talked about public accountability and being able to question and et cetera, and not be a PR exercise. But in your procedure rule, you're saying that the meeting will cover only procedural items A to C, which are the mayor, a person to preside, announcements and receive apologies. No questions, no deputations, no petitions, no declarations of interest, nothing like that on this. And then it says any agenda items agreed by the Mayor and Chief Executive of Kirklees Council with the Mayor of the mayoral authority. So can I ask, what happens if the council itself asks at a meeting for a particular subject to be covered at the meeting when the mayor comes? How is that going to work? It just seems that whilst we've got the essence of bringing the mayor to Kirklees, absolutely, yes, and for there to be updates, etc., and visibility, we've got that in this. But then we are restricting discussion and we are restricting public accountability, something of which we are asking the combined authority themselves to do. And then we are not doing it ourselves. And I'm sorry, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I decided not to mince my words. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Part of the discussions we had throughout, whether it was the workshop or the... Oh, are you still trying to speak, Liz, or is my... Because you're on mute if you are. Were you trying to say something, Liz, or was my my connection going funny? I'm not sure.
I think it was your connection. I wasn't saying anything. No.
I've got a lag in my video, so it looked like you were still talking. I thought I was speaking over you. Sorry. I'm trying to remember what I was saying there. Oh, yeah, as part of the discussions that we had as both the workshop and the previous Corporate Governance and Audit Committee, when we've discussed this, we were all in agreement that it was important for that to be an opportunity for all members to have a say, to ask questions of all groups and none. I think that has to be an important part of that as we do it. So I think your point's right. Could David or Julie come in on that as to whether she's right about whether we are indeed restricting ourselves in that event?
Could I try and respond to that, please? It wasn't my intention to try and restrict it. I was trying to keep it as open as possible. And if I failed in my drafting, then my apologies. We can go away and look at it. When we'd had the workshops, I'd taken away that it was an opportunity for all members at all levels of the council to have that conversation, discussion, debate with the mayor. And that was my starting point, actually. It wasn't, and when I was looking at our council procedure rules, and what's the ordinary course of business, I thought that you would want to focus on key issues at the time, rather than having potentially questions from members of the public, deputations, petitions, and so forth. I thought that members would want to focus on issues of concern and at the time. So we can try and set something down, or we can try and include something in here which allows greater flexibility. This follows the format of the way in which you would normally agree an agenda. So normally there would be a discussion by the chief executive with group leaders and others to make a decision about what might be on an agenda moving forward. So this was an attempt, obviously a failed attempt, to try and include to achieve that flexibility, Councillor Smage. If you've got any helpful thoughts about how we might change it, then please feed them in. It was a first stab at trying to create space for a meeting which wasn't necessarily within the parameters which we would normally set ourselves, and to ensure maximum flexibility that you might have at an extraordinary meeting, to allow a debate or a conversation to be had at a council meeting. Hope that explains. It wasn't trying to narrow things. It was actually quite the opposite. Actually, it was to allow it to be as wide a possible opportunity to discuss issues.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. This is what we asked for. This is we want the mayor to come to Kirklees. Absolutely, we need a procedure in here for that to happen. But we need to make sure that it is not, that the wording is right, so that we get what all the groups, what all the discussions across the council have actually put forward in the workshops that we were involved in. And so I'm just wondering if it's something that ought to be discussed, a little bit more. That's all. That's yeah. It's not for me to have those discussions. I don't think it's for others to have those discussions, I think. Thank you.
Yeah. Because, as Julie said, the wording, it's intended to be broad, as she said. It wouldn't preclude us from having a meeting as we've discussed how we want it. But I think the point you're making, Liz, is that it should be more specific and clear that that's the case. So do you think, are you suggesting that we should amend them before referring to them to the annual council? Is that your suggestion?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether leaders need a discussion, you know what I mean, on this or whatever. But I mean, just restricting it to A to C. Does no councillor need to declare an interest on any of the items, for example? Do you know what I mean? It just doesn't make a lot of sense, really. But I think that it needs to be discussed, I think. Okay, but I realise it needs to go to annual council. This is the urgency. I realise it needs to go to annual council for it to be there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, as was obviously we've had other items on this agenda where it has to be referred to annual council, and we've delegated some authority to make a potential amendment before it gets there. Shall we? I mean, I was going to say members. It's myself and John as the active members in the meeting at the minute who are full members of CGAC. John, should we perhaps, or would you be comfortable approving the report with delegated authority to myself as chair to speak with Julie and potentially some consultation with leading group leaders to see? Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Were there, and Councillor Davis obviously in the meeting as well, were there any other points or questions on the report? No, so we're happy to accept the report with that and the delegated authorities myself to look at amending the point on the additional meeting for the mayor. And John said he's happy with that, so that is carried. So that brings us on to item 11, informing the audit risk assessment for Kirklees Metropolitan Council. And we have, I believe it's James. Good morning, James.
Morning, Chair. Hope everyone's okay. This is a relatively quick one. It's just as part of the annual audit planning work, GT have asked officers to answer a series of questions which are across the 2 appended documents. CGAC are asked to agree the documents. Basically, the format of them is a series of questions from the auditors, which officers answer. The officers are compiled really between internal audit, accountancy and legal. In terms of Appendix A, it covers topics along lines of general inquiries of management, internal control, fraud, laws and regulations, litigations and claims, related parties and accounting estimates. And that's Appendix A. Appendix B is an accounting estimate management summary letter, and this covers the use of accounting estimates across key accounting areas, including operational land and buildings valuation, council dwellings valuation, investment properties valuation, and the LGPS, so that's a pension net liability valuation. So they're really the really big areas and the big figures that are in the balance sheet. External audit just use these to inform their planning progress for further work during the bulk of the audit, which will be commencing like July, August, September time, to finalise, hopefully having some final auditor's statement of accounts to committee on the 24th of September. So yeah, that's it for me. Any questions?
Thank you very much, James. Not from myself. John, is there anything?
No, I mean, it is pretty, as James said, it's pretty straightforward, isn't it, this report? And there's nothing there I wouldn't expect to see there. So there's nothing that raised my eyebrows when I read through it. So no questions from me.
Thanks. Stephen from Grant Thornton, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, just very briefly, just to give a bit of context, we used to ask these very same questions directly of management and then directly of yourselves as well as the those charged with governance. So we realised that probably wasn't the most efficient way of doing it. So we've asked for the inquiry from the finance team, and then for you to sort of vouch that you're happy with that response, and then we get the the assurance that we need. But if it's useful to you, I mean, and clearly I've read through everything that's there, and there's no surprises to me there, and it is a very useful document in terms of compiling our audit plan. And the point on the estimates that James mentioned, that's covered in my progress report as well. So I'll come back to that at in the next half an hour or whenever it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you very much for that, Stephen. We don't like surprises at this committee, so good to hear. Yeah, so we're happy to approve that, aren't we, John?
Yeah.
And Councillor Davis, excellent. That brings us on to our quarterly report of internal audit, quarter for January 21 to March 21. So back to Martin Durnley. Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is obviously the public part of this report. We often do them combined, but we're doing them separated because of the fact that what follows is the annual report. So basically, this is just a very summary report on the work conducted in relation to Kirklees Council and Kirklees neighbourhood housing in the final quarter of 2021. I'm sort of positive to report that we've made reasonable progress in getting back to doing quite a fair bit of routine planned audit work, which has helped me to reach the assurances that I'll discuss in more detail when we get onto the annual report. So whilst the amount of work we've achieved in a year is heavily reduced, it is nevertheless, I think, sufficient to enable me to form an opinion. And we've also continued to spend an awful lot of audit time on government grant related assurance or providing assurance and control into the government's grant related business rate grant schemes. So that's what we've been up to. By the year end, we got to a 71% positive assurance opinion. That is somewhat lower than what we've achieved in previous years, but not massively so. And because we've tended to direct the work at what might be called the higher risk areas of activity, then it's a fairly positive outcome, I think, in the circumstances. We've also did some review specifically directed on KNH, the council housing subsidiary that has now closed down, and actually many of the findings on the core risk areas there, like payroll, were fine. There were other areas where there was a bit more scope for consideration of issues, which we will come back to perhaps in the private session. Similarly, with regard to category management procurement, and again throughout the period, my colleagues and team have spent time on things like supporting governance, projects, information management, National Fraud Initiative, the monthly pay projects, audits of things like Stronger Families. So that's what we've been up to during the period, and that's what's reported in more detail in the confidential report.
Thank you very much, Martin. Oh, could you mute yourself to prevent the feedback? Sorry. Cheers, Martin. I think we'll probably pick up most of the points in the annual report and the private session, unless there's anything you want to raise now, John.
No, happy.
All right, thank you very much, Martin. That's accepted, but don't go away yet, because we're straight back to you for the annual report and internal audit and issues for 21-22.
Yeah, so you are. So thank you, thank you everyone. I'm afraid this, as always, turns into a long report, most of which is an internal audit strategy document for the year 21-22, which we formally have to. Well, we don't have to reconsider it every year, but it probably makes good practice to reconsider it every year. So let's start by being open and saying that I do conclude that the organisation's assurance arrangements are sound. So there are, that's the core objective of internal audit, to give you an opinion about whether the council's arrangements are okay. So they are. Let's acknowledge, though, as I've just mentioned in the previous discussion, that the audit coverage this year was fairly limited. But we have set it out in much more detail what we've done in a visible form that's in the confidential session. Opinions are based on the work of Kirklees Council and, as I've just mentioned, on KNH, for which you act as audit committee as well. Obviously, the organisation's been operating in a rather different way, and this year, so many people have done things from home. That having been said, the council does have a robust system of integrated financial management, which in itself is quite successful and worked as an IT system from anywhere in the world almost. So that has really helped in us being able to reach a positive assurance. We have obtained some assurance statements out of directors, getting them to declare where they believe that they have acted outside, or their staff have acted outside of normal arrangements. And these have not revealed any significant variations. I suppose there are a few observations and qualifications I make that are detailed in the report, but the general areas there aren't huge numbers of general areas of concern, perhaps relating to areas such as procurement, but again, perhaps best discussed in the private session. I've carried out my own review as I'm required to do, or at least again, this is a case you have to do it regularly, so I do it each year, of how an internal audit team complies with, or internal audit function complies with the public sector internal audit standards. Appendix 2 of the attached report demonstrates the extent to which I think it complies. It complies largely. As usual, I've got a couple of recommendations and issues that me and my audit team need to work through. We didn't, in honesty, manage to address some of the issues that were identified in last year's report because of the distractions that have arisen during 2021, so we'll come back to those in 21-22. So that's the sort of conclusion part of my annual report for 2021. In relation to 21-22, I'm, as I say, asking you to approve a revised charter. It's track changed and again amended in the same way that I mentioned before, which is that I only show you the track changes in the text that are of the text itself, not just of format changes. There are relatively few changes in there. Some of them reflect the issues that were raised in relation to the financial procedure rules about the rights of internal audit to access and see documents and records. That's the key change in the strategy, and it is to just make it align with what's in the financial procedure rules. I've proposed a draft audit plan for 21-22, and we have talked with strategic directors and service directors about it to a limited extent. They've had a chance to input to it. It's based on the long-term audit plan that you have had for some years now, and we have drawn the core priority audits that we weren't able to do in 2021 and put them in with the 21-22. It's a difficult thing. I think this is too ambitious if we carry on working in the way that we are working at the moment. So I suppose it comes back to how soon is the organisation going to return to something closer to normality? It's not going to return to what it was before, and that is going to still leave an assurance gap that we need to start to understand. It may be that it's an assurance gap that you as the audit committee are willing to accept. I suppose you need my advice on that. Or we have to work out how we resource or achieve a level of assurance that is adequate to meet the needs, your needs as an audit committee, and which the organisation wishes to resource. So the plan that is in there on pages 254, it is I think ambitious. I don't think we will achieve the whole lot, but I think it makes sense to start with that ambition. But I need to keep observing and telling you about how much resource we actually have and how much capability we have to achieve the projects that are listed in there. Again, some of them are probably ambitious to the extent of the number of people in my team who have the skills to be able to do justice to the objectives of some of those quite challenging audits. I think that's probably all that I want to say. So again, to just assure you all that we do have that I am satisfied, or I am advising you that we do have sound assurance arrangements. That obviously comes with a bit more caveating and a bit more reflections of concern than would arise in a normal year. But you know, it's there, and that's something that you, I suppose, formally are really asked to reach a conclusion about today. So so that's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And can you put yourself on mute, please, Martin?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, and thanks for all the work that you and your team do. It is much appreciated. I know we said in almost every conversation, it has been a difficult year in many ways, difficult for audit as well, as you've said, in that it's massively affected what you've been able to do and how much you've been able to do, as we know from having revised the audit plan a couple of times throughout the year. But you've been able to give us your advice, and it's much appreciated. And thank you for everything that you've done. As you've said, sort of on the summary of the audit work for the year, the level, the opinion is not as good as it has been in previous years, and where we want it to be. But as you say, I understand that is likely because of, as you say, we have to do much more targeted internal audit this year. So I completely understand that. But as you say on 4.1 in the report, and as you sort of outlined as you were speaking to us, there is going to be, as we know, we've not done the audit plan as we expected, as we set out at the beginning of last year, and there's work to be done to catch up on what's been missed and to try to ensure that if there is going to be some sort of assurance gap, as you put it, that's acceptable to you and to us as the committee. And as you say in 4.1, and this is something we've talked about previously, we do seem to have a slightly smaller internal audit team than other authorities, and I think it would be helpful for us, and it's a decision for the organisation, of course, not us, but to ensure that in future years we don't let that assurance gap become an issue, and to catch up on the work that we've not been able to do this year. I think it would be helpful for the organisation to reflect on what you've said and that the point that you make there. But thank you very much, Martin. John, did you want to come in?
So I echo a lot of what you said. Well, I think the team have done sort of remarkably well in the circumstances, and the support that they've been giving in terms of providing assurance around the grant schemes is something that got up and running very, very quickly, and is a credit to the team and the flexibility of the team as well. I also was just reflecting on actually, given the very unusual circumstances we've been working with, and how some of it, certainly in the earlier days, was a bit hand to mouth. It's remarkable that we've got the level of assurance that we have been able to achieve, which again is a credit to the wider team, not so much Martin's team that are marking their homework, but the teams that were still making sure that things were done appropriately and in the right way, and with the right controls and checks and balances in place, even in the disparate way that we were working. And certainly in the early stages, there was a level of uncertainty through all of us about how actually things did work. So yeah, I just echo your comments about thanks to Martin and the team. And you're right that it's right for the organisation to reflect that if moving forward there is the challenge in terms of capacity for the audit team, that needs to be acknowledged and resolved in one way or another.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And, thank you very much, Martin, as John said, and as I've said, for all the work. John, I assume we're happy to accept the report and Martin's opinion that we're adequately assured for the year.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That brings us on to item 14, which is the external audit letter 2019-20. Is that Stephen? Nice to see you again. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, this is fairly brief because it's the annual audit letter for last year's audit, so it's you'll be pleased to see gladly putting the matter to bed. It's just a summary. It's a public document. It goes on your website. It's a summary of the audit findings report that you're all very well familiar with. So it summarises the risks, our responses, the positive news about the unqualified opinions that you got. The only thing that we're updating on is to say that we finished the whole of government accounts work and submitted that to the National Audit Office and then certified the audit as complete. So I don't, unless you've got any questions, I wouldn't expect there's nothing new in there really, which which should come as any surprise. Okay.
No, thank you very much for that, and thank you for it. We're very pleased to receive it. Okay. Thank you. So that takes us forward then to the external progress report, April 2021. So back to yourself, I suspect.
Okay, no, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I must say I do have a bit of a bad internet connection today, so if I do start cutting out, let me know in one way or another, and I'll turn my camera and see if that helps you. but hopefully it's going to work. Yeah? So it's a fairly brief progress report on the 2021 audit, given that it's quite an early stage of the audit. But we also touch on a few other areas that we think you might be interested in, and a technical update as well. So starting on, the report starts at page 305 of the pack. Page 308, that sets out that we've started the planning process. That's the stage that we're at the moment. So we're updating our systems knowledge, holding meetings with management, talking through some of the accounting matters that are cropping up at the moment. So the audit plan is actually being drafted itself. So we'll agree that with management, and we'll bring that to the next committee, and that'll set out more detail regarding the risks and milestones and materiality, etc. And I suppose we're probably going to have to conduct much of the audit again this year remotely, yeah, subject to any restrictions that come in, for your safety and our safety as well. But the positive news is that we're very familiar now with auditing remotely, using Teams and other audit document sharing software. So hopefully a smooth process. Page 308, that talks about the new VFM framework, which I'll come on to in a bit more detail. With the report also confirms that we've finished all of the 2019-20 audit work, including the whole of government accounts that I just mentioned. We've also completed all of the grant work, other than the 2019-20 housing benefits, where we've got an extension until May to complete that with the Department for Work and Pensions, and that's really due to the scale of the extended testing that we're doing on rent allowances and rent rebates, which the DWP expects. But we've pretty much finished that now, so we're just compiling our report on that. Other than the housing benefits, all the grant work is finished. The audit deliverables on page 310. So the key date, just to point out to you, is 30th of September is the date when we anticipate giving the audit opinion. It was going to be 31st of July, but as a result of the Redmond review, MHCLG is proposing it's extended to the end of September. And as has just been announced this week by the National Audit Office, the deadline for reporting on value for money has been extended to 3 months after the audit opinion deadline. Yeah? So we do hope to do it a bit sooner than that, but NAO do recognise that there's a lot of work. I'll come on to VFM in a moment. So yeah, the two technical areas I wanted to talk about in the technical update really was the value for money framework changes and the changes to the accounting estimates that we've also touched on briefly. So in terms of value for money, just as a bit of background, the National Audit Office, the Code of Practice, it's updated every 5 years. So it's been updated this year for 2021. There's no real changes to the accounts audit, but this value for money audit change is quite big in terms of scope and how we actually report it to you. So what we're seeing really is a move away from the old style of reporting by exception to a much more granular, detailed piece of work where we report on the key areas. So the old areas which we used to cover, they've been replaced, but there's quite a bit of overlap. So we used to look at informed decision making. That's now covered by the governance theme in the report there, where we look at your decision making framework. The sustainable resource deployment, that was never really going to go away. So that's now covered under the financial sustainability heading. And the old working with partners, that's covered by both of the governance and financial sustainability categories. So just as a reminder, last year and previous years, the work was very much risk-based. We had to identify a significant value for money risk, which I don't think was entirely clear, and I think the National Audit Office recognised that as well as to the scope of that. But we had to identify a significant risk and then report on that risk and then give you an opinion, which was either an unqualified opinion, an adverse opinion, or a qualified except for opinion. And the problem with that, as the NAO realised, is that virtually all councils had the same risk around financial sustainability, which started to become a little bit repetitive and meaningless, I suppose. Yeah, and a lot of people were getting qualified. In the end, you ended up being in the pack if you were getting qualified. I mean, Kirklees wasn't qualified, but it was quite a rare exception, really. So, in effect, the old VFM model was starting to lose effect. So what we're going to be doing in the future is reporting in detail against each of the new criteria in quite a detailed report called an auditor's annual report, and that's going to replace the annual audit letter. So that annual audit letter I've just mentioned, that was the last one. So for each of the area, if we find any serious deficiencies, which we don't expect to do, we then start making improvement recommendations rather than giving an opinion. So we don't give a value for money conclusion, and we just give a report and we identify any significant weaknesses if we find them. So I think it's an idea really of refreshing the idea and overcoming some of those issues that we've had with some areas really where the value for money conclusion wasn't being taken too seriously by some councils, especially if it was again and again, year after year. The new criteria themselves, there's the governance, so that's around looking at your decision-making procedure, looking at how reliable the management information that you receive is, seeing that you are using that to its full effect. And much of that's obviously the bread and butter to us as auditors, because we attend this meeting and we read minutes from a number of meetings, meet with Eamon and the team, so we have a good feel for your governance arrangements. We're not identifying any weaknesses in that. We know quite well how your governance structure works. But it's quite clear that the National Audit Office is expecting us to go much wider than the finance team. So we'll be speaking to a number of other operational service line directors to understand the governance situation on a wider basis. The financial sustainability criteria, that overlaps with what we did pretty much last year, but we'll be looking in detail at your outturn against your budget, how you set the budget, your medium-term financial plan, looking at the pressures and looking at your savings plans. Again, familiar territory to us, fortunately. So much of that information is gleaned from reading minutes and holding meetings and raising challenges and comparing Kirklees with other clients that we have. And the third category, improving economy and efficiency and effectiveness. So here we're looking in detail about how you deliver your services in a cost-efficient way and how well you understand the cost and make sure that you've got the right information to understand that from the management team. So we've got a whole raft of key performance indicators, not just financial ones, but operational ones, which we're going to be sharing. We can share with you and we can compare your performance with other trusts. So there's quite a change there, really. Quite a lot more work to do. It'll take quite a bit more of our time, but I think the feeling is that you'll get a much more useful report at the end of it. I mean, I suppose in recognition of the fact that there is more work and we're having to do much of it remotely, that's why the National Audit Office has extended the deadline this year, probably this year only, for an extra 3 months after the audit opinion, and that does help us to focus on giving you the audit opinion in a timely basis. So that's a bit of a headline there on the value for money conclusion. Just quickly, I wanted to talk about the accounting estimates as well in the report, because this is a new area again where the Financial Reporting Council is expecting auditors, not just public sector auditors, but private sector auditors, to undertake some more work in understanding how you're arriving at your material estimates in the accounts, and also not only how management are compiling the estimates, but how you as the committee, really, and those charged with governance, make sure that you're familiar with it and you're happy with them and you agree that those estimates are robust. And that really explains that paper earlier on, which James mentioned, where there was quite a lot of detail about some of the material estimates. Because what we're trying to look at really is challenge the thought process that you're arriving at in arising at those estimates, understanding any alternative approaches that could be used, testing the systems that you're using to provide those estimates, looking at the controls, looking at prior year estimates, see if they're accurate, and understanding the role of the experts as well. So, yeah, as the committee, you can expect us really then to be challenging the finance team and making sure that you're fully aware really of how these estimates are being calculated. I mean, in the past there was really just a note in the accounts which explained a little bit about the estimates, but this report that James and Eamon have produced today it goes into a lot more granular detail, which is hopefully is helpful and interesting. Yeah. I just need to stress as well, it's only the material estimates in the accounts and material judgments that have been made by management, and there aren't too many of them, but not surprisingly it focuses around the valuation of your land and buildings, council dwellings and investment properties, and the valuation of your net pension fund liability, which is the focus of that report that James mentioned earlier on. I've nearly finished on it now. Last year there was quite a bit of uncertainty because of the timing at the 31st of March around property investments, and not just your property, land and buildings that you own, but also the property investments within the pension fund. So that wasn't really, that made estimation process a bit difficult. Fortunately, it's not going to be quite as much uncertainty this year. So what you won't be seeing is our emphasis of matter in the opinion around estimation uncertainty, and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors isn't putting the message out to their valuers that they must be emphasising the uncertainty that exists. So I mean, it's a quick canter through, really. What I've said to Eamon is, if you wanted any more information in this area, then John Roberts or myself would be happy to sort of talk you through it again in more detail, either in a future committee or outside of the committee, if that's helpful to you. And there's some links in the paper that I've provided that will give you a bit more detail as well. But hopefully that's helpful, and more than happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you very much. For that, Stephen, it's much appreciated. I think in particular for me it was interesting about the new approach to value for money, because as you say, it was the value for money isn't really what most people would understand as a value for money, and as you said, it sort of didn't have masses of meaning when almost every authority got it for sort of some of the basic stuff. So yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much. Did any members have any questions for Stephen? No? Right. Thank you very much, Stephen. It's much appreciated and good to see you. Right. That brings us to the end of the public session of the meeting. We'll now go into a private session to consider the quarterly report, internal audits, quarter 4, as Martin mentioned earlier. So I'll just say thank you very much to anyone who's watching, if they are, and wish you a happy rest of the day. Thank you very much.